Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Running for Souls podcast. My name is Keith Cartwright. I'm the host of this show, and I'm really glad to have you along listening in today, whenever it is that you're listening, wherever you are when you're listening in. I hope it's that you are out there running, battling this social distancing with a few miles of your own out there. And if you're listening in today, you're going to get a chance to listen to a conversation that I was really looking forward to, and it didn't disappoint. I got to meet Greg Armstrong a couple of weeks ago when I did a short interview with him as part of a preview discussion around the Quarantine Backyard Ultra. Ended up having a couple of thousand runners do that virtually from around the world, and Greg ended up being in the final four. So we're going to talk about that. He's a man of deep faith, and when I had the brief conversation with him prior to the Backyard Ultra, I could sense that there was a close parallel between this running journey and this faith journey he's on. And I've experienced that in my own life, so I couldn't wait to dig deeper into that part of Greg's running journey. And so he was gracious enough to give me an hour today that we sit down and have this conversation. So as quickly as I can, I want to hand this conversation over to me and Greg. Here's Greg Armstrong. All right. Well, I want to welcome Greg Armstrong. I got just a little bit of a taste of Greg last week when I interviewed Greg as part of a conversation I had with him and Harvey Lewis and Gene Dykes leading into their Quarantine Backyard Ultra, which we'll spend some time talking about today. But after I talked with Greg, I just felt called to just dig a little bit deeper into his story. So welcome, Greg.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Keith. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, well, we're going to talk a lot about running today, and then life and running. I'm curious how you got started in this whole running deal to begin with.
Sure. Well, I guess it really goes back to that. I guess I was indirectly inspired by that, that late 70s, early 80s craze where, folks would get out and do their morning runs. My dad was a big part of that. So I remember at a really young age watching my dad get up early in the morning and lace up his Nike waffle shoes and go out for his morning jog, and asking, when I would be able to join him. And first he'd let me ride my bike, and then I would, run the 2 miles with him. And I thought that was just the, greatest in the world. So I guess, in some respects, I guess I've always been a runner. I ran, high school, kind of that typical story, didn't make the varsity basketball team. So I went out for cross country and found a passion there. And I've always just continued to run. I got into ultra running in maybe 2007 was my first 100-miler, and kind of transitioned from the Ironman triathlon circuit to ultra running. That scene just kind of fits my personality a little bit more, and just the ultra running community. Nothing against the triathlon community, but there's just something about the camaraderie and the support that you find in the ultra community.
Yeah, well, I am fairly new to the whole ultra and really ultra and trail scene, but I tell people all the time that after spending, and I've only been running for 5 or 6 years, and the first 4 of that were road races, marathons, but when I ran my first trail race, it was that community that just something felt different about them. I ran the Georgia Jewel a couple of years ago, and I was about halfway through, and there were heat indexes in triple digits, and I was dying and hallucinating. And I look back at that experience. I ended up quitting the race, but I look back, and the number of people who stopped and in the middle of their race, offering me their food, offering me their drink, offering me anything they had to get me going again at their own expense. And it wasn't just some, it was every single person. That's come to define the ultra community for me.
Yeah, I agree 100%. The very first year that I did my first 100 miler was the Arkansas Traveler. That was the last year that I did an Ironman race. And so in, I think it was September, was the Louisville Ironman. And I'd trained pretty hard for that. And, I come into the race with my $8 racing bike and, you're talking to people before the race and the question is, what's your percent body fat? What do you pay your personal trainer? And just this super competitive spirit, which is nothing's wrong with that. And during the event, not a lot of conversation, not a lot of camaraderie, I guess you might say. And then a month and a half later, I did my first 100 at Arkansas Traveler, and I pull up, and the night before the 100 miler, everybody's sitting around the campfire, getting ready for this race, and you had all walks of life. And then during the event, there's still that competitive aspect of it, but there was just this, and I guess it's the fact that, you suffer so long together with other people that kind of forges a relationship. You're still competing against one another, but just the community and the sense of community was so much different than what I found in the triathlon world. And after that, I was sold. And so, I agree with you 100%. There's just something unique about that sense of community and the support that we can offer one another.
Well, not only did you get into this ultra racing, you're pretty good at it. So 2019, you won the Ball State 500K. So you ran 314 miles across the state of Tennessee, and you did that unsupported, and you did it in a record time of a little over 3 days and 14 hours. And the other element to that is that you run in sandals. So that's fairly unheard of in my world. Talk to me about this running in sandals and where that came from.
Sure. Well, I have a nonprofit. It's called Run for Water, and I guess it's another passion of mine is doing what I can to help solve the water crisis in our world, and whether that's from an environmental standpoint, but primarily from a humanitarian standpoint of trying to help individuals get clean water to drink. And I had spent 3 months in southern Honduras doing water sterilization systems and working with local churches and local communities to try to help solve some of the water issues. And it was the rainy season during in that area of southern Honduras. And at that time I was wearing, trail shoes, just your typical running shoes. And every day I would go out and work, whether it was, I would jog through the forest and my feet were just soaking wet. So I was constantly changing socks. And then I got back from that 3 months in Honduras and I was like, I've got to find, a more utilitarian footwear, and so I started looking and researching. I wanted a sandal that I could work in, that was rugged enough to work in, that I could run in also. And it was primarily for, some of my ministry work overseas. And, I didn't have to change socks and I could just, a lot more versatile and a lot more minimalist. And so I started trying out different sandals and, making sure, I could find a sandal that I could train in while I was overseas. And after about a month of testing out these sandals, I just really enjoyed the freedom. My toes could spread out, my feet could breathe. I didn't have to worry about sweaty socks or wet socks if it happened to rain. And so I did Teton 100 was the first official ultra race that I did in sandals. And from then on, I haven't turned back. I still, if I do a race like Barkley marathons or a really technical trail race, I will go by. There's a secondhand shoe store that I can pick up some trail shoes for about $30, and so I'll go by and pick up some trail shoes. Other than that, it's pretty much the Teva that I wear. I wanted to test out last year what's the most amount of miles that I could get before they absolutely fell apart. And I got 2,530 something miles on a pair before they just basically disintegrated. And I think they cost me like $55. So that's a pretty good return on the investment. And I was also able to summit Kilimanjaro in a pair of Teva Kansas. So, for me, I guess the rationale behind it, a race like Badwater, I did Badwater 146 all the way to the summit of Mount Whitney and Vol State. Those two races, probably more than any other ultra, are known for just destroying your feet. But I didn't have one blister in Vol State. I'll get a little chafing around the ankle from time to time if there's a lot of rain, but because it allows my feet to breathe and there's not that constant sweat and from your wet socks. I think that really helps. So in a road race, there's definitely benefits, in my opinion, to the sandals.
Well, when I was reading about it, you got my attention when you said you got over 2,500 miles on a pair, because as a runner who's putting, $100 and some into a pair of running shoes that last maybe 300 or 400 miles, it gets to be an expensive sport. So
Yeah.
the Tevas may be something I experiment with. And we're going to talk a little bit about your experience with this backyard ultra, but and after you ran the backyard ultra, you wrote a write-up on Facebook that I've got here, and just so much of it resonated with me. But I want to read something you wrote and then talk about this a little bit. So you said, "This is my affinity for ultra marathons. The further you run, the limiting factors are less physical and more of a resolve and fortitude. A 300-mile race is so much different for the mind. The mind hurts far more than the body. In fact, my willingness to suffer is the only way I can be competitive in a running event. I lack the genetic God-given gift of speed or natural talent, but I can continue to train my mind to endure more pain and suffering. That's the fun part." There'll be a lot of people listening who will hear pain and suffering, and that's the fun part, and wonder, what on earth is this guy talking about? So tell me a little bit about where you're coming from when you say that.
Sure. And I guess fun, we can put quotation marks around that. I guess it depends on, and maybe fun is not the exact word that should be used there, but I just, personally, from a spiritual standpoint, I found that there's so much benefit to challenging the mind, and renewing the mind. Scripture speaks volumes about the renewal of the mind and how you can train the mind. And my favorite verse is Philippians 4 and verse 11, where Paul says, "I've learned to be content." It's we think contentment or peace of mind, or even an internal joy, is happenstance, or it has to do with our circumstances. But I love the emphasis in that verse that contentment is something that we learn. And our bodies obviously have limitations. I mean, all of us, regardless of our talent or our ability, there's certain limitations that we have physically, on our bodies. But I'm fully convinced that the limitations on our minds are so much. We have so many more opportunities to challenge ourselves mentally. And so, to me, that's the part that's constantly evolving for me in the sport of ultra running, is the fact that I can always learn more about my mental fortitude. And that's something that I can constantly work on and get that stronger. Physically, I'm be 47 this year. I'm not, not so naive. I'm not, at the peak of my physical, um, you know, performance, whether it's because of age or whatever it may be. But that's what's beautiful. Mentally, I can be stronger mentally than I was. I can be stronger mentally today than I was yesterday. And that's what I love about these ultras, especially the long distance events. The longer the event, the less the success has to do with your physical ability than it does with your mental ability.
Yeah, well, I could talk all day about that. I do a lot of my work is in substance abuse prevention, and more lately it's been a lot of work around childhood trauma. And, the fascinating part about that work has been discovering how the mind develops and where a lot of resiliency is absolutely in retraining our mind, how we look at certain things that have happened in our life, a lot of strength that comes for young people who turn into adults with a lot of challenges. It's, resiliency and grit is too often we just talk about it in terms of suck it up and get moving. But in actuality, it's retraining our mind, how we look at some things and how we see the world in a lot of ways. And the more I've been working in that world, the more I start looking at my Bible, and over, I am sure that God wired our minds in a very specific way. And if you look at certain things in the world, and me, it's this childhood trauma, the way God wired our minds becomes just this greatest proof for me that, not that I need it, but that there indeed is a God who had a very specific plan about how we were going to be wired to navigate this world. And really a lot of that wiring and that navigation has become to be able to recognize our strength and to be wired to lean into the right space for kind of strength to carry on. So talk to me, when we talked last week, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this, we talked about this quarantine backyard ultra. And so a lot of races have been canceled this spring. A group came together and put together this format of a backyard ultra where you run 4.17 miles every hour. If you knock that 4.17 miles out in 45 minutes, you get 15 minutes to rest, and then you got to line up and do it again. You tackled that on a treadmill in your basement. And when we had talked, you talked a little bit about your goals, but when you did your recap, you talked about you had an A goal of 48 hours, or an A goal, I believe, of 300 miles, 3 days of running, B goal of 48 hours, which would be 200 miles of running. You said, spoiler, I failed at both. You came up just short of the 48 hours. This was the first time you had engaged in this format. So tell me what went right, what went wrong, what did you think of this whole backyard ultra format?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, Keith, I'm still kind of on cloud nine from the event, from the standpoint of not my success, but really more of my failure, because it was one of those, especially in ultra running, or I guess any sport or anything that you pursue. You learn from every training run. You're going to learn a little bit more about yourself. Every event, you're going to learn a little bit more about yourself. But every now and then, there's an event that comes along where you learn about yourself, and that was this weekend for me. I'm still really excited about that, because to me, I think I have to throw that out there. I committed a long time ago that the journey of ultra running, yes, it's great when you can podium or you can win or you can break a course record. But I mean, let's just face it, that's got to be secondary, because that pales into comparison. Me winning a race or setting a course record, that doesn't make that, in and of itself, does not make me a better human. But it's the lessons that I learn about myself along the way that ultimately allow me to be a stronger, a more compassionate, a better husband, a better father, a better contributor to the world in which I live. And so, and that's what this race, I mean, I've resisted the backyard format for a long time. Not that I think it's great. I'm just a very intrinsically motivated individual, and I didn't like the fact that, the race, your success or your failure depended upon another individual. For me, the most frustrating thing about an ultra, and I think you saw a glimpse of this with Mike Wardian, is if everyone quit and you wanted to continue on, you're really not allowed to. I mean, that would drive me absolutely crazy, and but the part that I think I misjudged and I didn't fully appreciate is the idea that you have to honor every hour, and you have to be back in that mindset of the ultra. Almost every 100-mile plus, especially multi-day. Vol State is my main experience with multi-day events. You have low points. I mean, you're going to have periods where you want to quit. I mean, that's just the nature of an ultra marathon. I don't care who you are or how many you've run, especially a multi-day. Maybe not a 24-hour or less. I've had a few of those where I was dialed in and I never thought about quitting, but anything that extended over 24 hours, you have those demons of, why am I doing this? Everything hurts. I can just go home, and you can quit. And generally you have the opportunity to take a break, and you can kind of reset the mind. This event does not allow for that whatsoever. I've tried to prepare myself mentally for that. I knew those times were coming. I knew the low points were coming. And I'm still I'm so frustrated, but I'm also excited because I learned a weakness that I didn't know that I had, if that makes sense. So it gives me something to work on. That's my affinity. I mean, I've been doing this for 13 years. I'm 47 years old, and I'm still learning volumes about myself and my strengths, and especially my weaknesses. And when an event like that can reveal to me areas where I'm weak, it's exciting, because that means growth can come from that. And so I guess what went right, I felt really good. I was pretty stiff, during, probably a little more stiff than what I anticipated to be by running on a treadmill. I thought the abuse on the body would be less. And I guess it was maybe hour 40 or 41, I hit a low point, which kind of anticipated. I told my wife I didn't want her to crew for me around the clock. I wanted her to get some sleep, and she had made some extra food and set it out for me to get through the night. This was the second night. So this would have been maybe 10, 11 o'clock on Sunday night. And she texted me, I think it was around maybe 11. This was around, I don't know, I may have my hours off just a little bit, but somewhere around hour 41, 42, something like that. And she said, "You need anything?" And I said, "Yes." I was hitting a low point. So she came down and, gave me a little motivation and helped. And I thought I was kind of back on track mentally. So I told her, "Go back to sleep. I think I'll be okay till morning." And at that point, I was just saying, I want to at least get through 48 hours. That was kind of my big goal. I wanted to, because I knew I was capable of doing that. And then all of a sudden, I finished a lap, and wow, I looked at all of my competitors. There's 4 of us left. So all 3 of them had been done with their lap, or their 4.17 miles 5 minutes before me. They all finished in 40 minutes. So I'm watching them on the Zoom, and they're resting. Of course, I'm assuming, that goes into your head. I think that they're not hurting. They look fresh as a daisy. I'm struggling. I'm still having to run for 5 minutes. And I sat there, and then I get off the treadmill, and all those, I had a moment of weakness. And if you watch the video, it was a minute left in that hour. I think it was the 43rd hour. I get back up, I stand on the treadmill, I walk back to the computer, look at my competitors, go back to the treadmill. You can kind of see that, and then I let the bell ring, and I sat down, and I called it. And I can't say that there's any real reason other than just the typical fatigue. The couch was 3 feet in front of the treadmill, and then, but that's my point. I had like 3 minutes to make that decision, and I didn't have the opportunity to kind of sit down for a good 20, 30, 45 minutes maybe, and just get my head back in the game. And but if you don't answer the bell at the top of the hour, you're disqualified. And so that was the end of my race.
I have said this this is a nightmare sort of format for me, because I struggle with, when it comes race day, getting myself ready for that start line. I mean, nothing, no anxiety attack or anything like that, but it's just hard getting myself ready for a big race. But in this format, you have to do it every hour. And
That's right.
and watching you, especially in this format, I'd watch you in between your miles. You'd sit down on your couch there, your recliner. You'd have, a 2 liter thing. It looked like a Coke or something, and you were having all the comforts of home. And I thought, oh my goodness, that would be like 1,000 times harder for me, because if you're out in the woods doing this thing, you're not going to get terribly comfortable.
Hmm.
But to have to respond to that mentally every hour, get to that start line and do that thing. I applaud you, my friend, for getting to that final four. When you say you discovered your weakness, how would you just summarize that weakness you discovered in yourself in this race?
Yeah, and again, I guess that because that's my first experience, I thought I had kind of prepared myself mentally for that. I knew there was going to be moments like that. It's so interesting because all the mantras and all of the things I told myself that I kind of tried to implant into my thought process before the race, like in that 5 minute window, I forgot them. It's like, I tried as best as I could to prepare myself. I knew there was going to be low points even in the first 48 hours, because at that point, I'd gone, what, almost at that point, almost 48 hours without sleep. I wasn't able to really get any kind of real naps or anything. So, you got the sleep deprivation starting to kick in. And I meant that in my post. I know people thought that was funny, but in my experience, if you can get past those 48 hours, at least the next 24 hours from 48 to 72, in my experience, is exponentially easier. The first 24 is, in my experience, is kind of boring, because you're going slow, you're not really pushing yourself, you're just kind of, it's not, sleep deprivation hasn't kicked in. It's that second 24-hour period up, or the second 24-hour period up to 48 hours, that I always struggle. I always have. And I guess it's getting over the hurdle of sleep deprivation. It's almost like your body is wanting to shut down, and then it's sending all these signals. We need to stop. We need to stop. We need to stop. And then if you can convince your body that, okay, hey, we're not going to stop, it stops sending those signals. And so that was my initial goal from the very beginning: at least get to 48 hours. I knew I was capable of doing that. There's no reason that I shouldn't be able to do that, other than some kind of injury, possibly. And I didn't have an injury. But I just, I wasn't able to fight through or to silence those, and I think I related it to in my post. It's like, it's a temptation, and if you think about, we're tempted with many things in our life, and the temptation to quit, and it's so available, because as soon as you quit, all the pain subsides,
That
all the struggles that you're dealing with, it goes away. Just all you got to do is stop, and no one's forcing you to continue on. And that's where that mental strength really, really. So I'm excited. I'm excited that I discovered that weakness. I'm excited to challenge myself in that way again, so I can continue to grow.
that resonated with me so much. I've got that here. I underlined it. You said the temptation to quit is so strong. The stop is the morphine to the pain and chronic suffering. It's so obvious, simple, so available. The stop is the drug to cure all the pain. And man, that resonated, because, like I said, I've had a couple of ultras where I stopped, and in the aftermath, the thing I've practiced the most in that, I'm headed back to the Georgia Jewel this fall, hopefully, registered for the 50 miler, which I haven't been able to complete yet. But the one thing I keep practicing is pushing myself to this place where I want to stop and then don't. I just keep
Mm-hmm.
telling people I keep going to a place where I'm begging myself to stop and then don't. It's so simple to stop when you've experienced that's such a quick relief to all the pain. If you make a habit of that, and that's when I love that you, because I do work in drug use and drug prevention. I love that you equated that to a drug,
Right.
because you can get so addicted to that. When you
Yep.
know that stopping is a quick end to all the pain,
Yep.
it can be addicting, just like a drug. And so you have to find and remind yourself, and that's where it gets back to me. retraining the mind, you have to have a library full of times where, man, I've wanted to stop and I didn't. I've wanted to
Yep,
stop and I didn't. Because if you don't have that, you'll go back to the time
that's right.
where you stopped and it eased all the pain. So I really appreciated your recap. It just resonated with me so much. And I want to talk about this powerful word you introduced. I had to look it up, colaphizo, and you said it's a powerful word. It means to buffet oneself. Spiritually speaking, there's great worth in the exercise of buffeting one's body and mind for a deeper revelation or enlightenment. That's what these events mean to me. They are a time to gain enlightenment about myself, weaknesses, and my ability to contribute more to the world in which I inhabit. I want to pursue that connection, that how this ultra running and this understanding and learning from your weaknesses, how does that then translate to this capacity to want to contribute more to the world that you inhabit?
Sure. Um, well, I guess part of my, well, my philosophy of life is stems from my faith and just the core of what I believe. I believe that um, we were created and we were placed on this earth for a very distinctive purpose, and that's to contribute to the world in which we live and not just simply be a consumer of it. And so that's always at the forefront of my mind. Or I'm not always successful at it. There's times that I get selfish, just like anyone else, and I consume more than what I contribute. But um, each day, I try to purpose myself to find ways to be more of a contributor. And I'm also of the opinion that there's a lot of spiritual disciplines that I think that we've abandoned over the years. Um, and many of our, I guess, more modern um, traditions of Christianity, you might say. As an example, we've reduced spiritual disciplines to prayer and scripture reading, and obviously those are very important. But there's so many other spiritual disciplines that I think we can resonate with, that can produce growth in our walk with God, in our quest to be, more of a contributor to the world. And one of those is the spiritual discipline of self-denial, however you want to look at it, buffeting oneself. Scripture speaks volumes, Old Testament and New Testament of life, like of denying oneself of certain things in order to find some enlightenment or growth in that. Whether that's fasting or something. And so I try to practice that in multiple ways in my life. This idea of self-denial, and ultra running is a very, what I've found, a very effective way for me to find that enlightenment about myself. And it's a time, and I think about the Apostle Paul with the thorn in the flesh. And I think there's, in my mind, I think it's by God's providence that we don't know exactly what that thorn in the flesh was, because I think it makes it more relatable. And he prayed very, very earnestly for that thorn in the flesh to be removed. And the answer was no. That thorn in the flesh is something given to you to buffet you. I think some of the earlier translations use the word buffet to buffet you. And then Paul goes on to reflect that his moments of weaknesses, that's where his strength and God's strengths are truly revealed. And I can, that resonates with me. And ultra running is just a way that I found to take myself physically and mentally to a point of true weakness, to where enlightenment and just volumes. I learned volumes about myself. And that's another thing about ultra running, at least for me. I've never completed, I've completed a 5K race, or I've won a basketball game or a tennis match, and you feel that, larger than life, where you feel like, oh, I've conquered, I'm victorious, I've won, I'm the best. In an ultra marathon, for me, especially anything that's extended over 24 hours, never once have I felt that the arrogance of victory. It's always by the grace of God go I. I mean, even if I'm able to accomplish a goal or to do something or to win the race, there's still just a showering of humility that comes with ultra running because of the deep and dark valleys that you were forced to go through, to where for me personally, I was just at a complete loss. I was so weak, I was so broken, that it revealed to me that, I needed, God to depend on. And I hope that makes sense, but I just think that it's good for the soul to realize, that we are weak, and that our bodies are weak and our minds are weak, and we have limitations. And for me, ultra running does that for me.
Yeah, I look at it in parallel to these times we're in. And, as a Christian, I get involved in, or I'm witness to, these conversations that go down the road of, so is this virus something God put on us? What's this message God's trying to send us with a virus? And I always say that, I'm not even going to leap for a minute to try to presume or project what God is saying in something specific like a virus. But I will say, as I stand back and observe and say, if I was God, I would have to sit and look at the results, as people have been stripped away of so many things that they lean on, whether it be jobs or whether it be their health, or in our students in school. There's a lot of things we have leaned on, going to the gym, going here, and friend circles. There's a lot of things that have been stripped away. And I say that with great sensitivity to people who are suffering. But then when I look at the result of it, I see people pouring into each other like I don't often see. I see churches going out of their way to band together in a time more difficult than ever to band together to help other people, to help their communities. So, to your point, we are in a time that would appear to be great physical, great spiritual weakness. And the result of that tends to be people leaning more on each other and more on God as the source of their strength. So, again, I, I have no idea what God's intention is, but I do know He has wired us to lean on Him for our strength. And in times like this, much like in a long ultra race, when you just get to this point where you got nothing left of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you know Jenny and Franklin Baker. They live there in Tennessee. They're race directors of the Georgia Jewel down there. And I interviewed Jenny a couple of years ago before I went and ran the Georgia Jewel. And I asked her, as a race director of an ultra race, it's 150 mile, and even there's some smaller distances. But I said, as a race director of a big ultra race like this, what's the most meaningful part of it for you? And I'll never forget her answer. She said, the most meaningful part is witnessing people have the most vulnerable conversations they've ever had with one another in their life. She said, because you get out there and all of your stuff just disappears. You are just actually worn down to your weakest, most vulnerable moments. And she said, I've just heard people have the most real and vulnerable conversations with themselves and with others that I've ever heard. And that, I didn't quite get what she was saying until I got out there and got in the middle of that. So kind of what you were just saying made me think of that. Tell me about Run for Water, Greg. How did this get put on your heart? You're clearly passionate about it. Tell us a little bit about what Run for Water is and how you got there.
Sure. Well, I guess you can call it an epiphany or however you want to look at it, but I guess it was maybe mid 2000s, 2002, 2008, maybe 2009, towards the end of that decade. I was just thinking about, again, how I could be more of a contributor and use the talents and the gifts that I've been given as a way of glorifying God and to serving others. And it up to that point in my life, running had always been, although something that I used to better myself, it was always kind of selfish in a sense of, I was running to win the race, or I was running, for personal health. And so I had this idea to start running for, a purpose greater than myself. And that's when the idea was just run for water. I had completed one 100-mile race. This was my second ultra. My goal was to run from the Alabama state line to the Kentucky state line through the state of Tennessee in less than 24 hours. It's 120.5 miles. And so that's actually how Run for Water started. It was just a singular event. And I found out that if I wanted people to raise money for this sterilization system for a school in Honduras, it was better for them to write a check to Run for Water. So I had to create this kind of temporary organization with the state so people could write their checks to Run for Water and not go to Greg Armstrong personally. And so for the first couple of years, that's all Run for Water was just, I would do an event, or I would organize a race just for one particular project. And then I like to say that it just grew organically from there, to where we started, doing projects in Honduras and Nicaragua and Haiti. We started a ministry in around 2011 in Appalachia. There's still children drinking from contaminated creeks and contaminated wells, 3.5 hours from where I'm sitting right now in East Tennessee and Eastern Kentucky. So we have a ministry there. And then Uganda, I think about 4 or 5 years ago, we started a ministry in Uganda where we repair wells and try to bring clean water to people.
What's it like for you when you go to these places and you see these folks getting to experience clean water?
Our last trip was in January to Uganda, and we found a niche that we have in Uganda is our organization. Although we will drill a well, we may drill 1 or 2 wells a year. Our niche is repairing wells. There's a lot of organizations and great organizations out there drilling wells, which is definitely a need. But what I found, a lot of those organizations were kind of a one and done. They'll go and they'll drill the well for the community, and then they're gone. They move on to another area. And because it's a mechanical well, 6 months may pass, 8 months may pass. Something's going to break on that well, and it takes a certain type of tool and a certain knowledge in order to repair the well. And so a lot of these wells that were drilled years ago are left broken. And so for the $7,000 that generally it costs to drill or to do a full new well project, I can repair 12 to 14 wells. And in that case, you're providing water to 12 to 13 more, times that many more people. So that's kind of become our niche. And I remember a well that this was probably, I think we're close to 100 wells that we've repaired in Uganda, in this region of Uganda, up to this point. And I told somebody, I've witnessed this 100 times. When that water starts flowing and the singing and the dancing takes place simply because they have clean water, that never gets old. I mean, there's just something just so basic about clean water and what that represents to people. And that's something that just really fulfills my soul to witness that. And I'm just humbled and blessed to be a part of that.
I read the book, Charity Water. Scott, his last name's escaping me, and I got interested in it because this was a guy who was hooked on drugs and he was raised a conservative Christian, then went wayward, got hooked on drugs, and then made something out of his life. And it really came through this discovery of how important water was to these folks in developing countries. But after reading that book, I mean, I came to fully appreciate just the difference folks having clean water makes in their overall health. So I appreciate what you do, and I'll share that out there. I went to Honduras last summer. As the first time I'd been to any developing country. And again, I would have never gone there if I hadn't been a runner. I tell folks that all the time. When I crossed the finish line of my first marathon, it wasn't this whole look what I just did. it was like somebody opened this door to, holy cow, I just did that. What else can I possibly do? And that mentality put me in Honduras. But I walked away from there with a lot of images, but one of them just sticks out to me, and it's sort of put this drive to continue partnering with Souls for Souls to do the work they do. We handed this little girl, she couldn't have been 6 or 7 years old, and I've got 11 and 13-year-old boys, but we handed this little girl a pair of shoes, and this smile came on her face that I, to this day, can't find the words to describe. It was just the purest, most joyful smile. And everybody kind of was taken off guard. We'd seen a lot of smiles, but they wanted to talk with this girl a little deeper to understand this smile. And they got to talking to her. That one pair of shoes gave her the capability to go back to school. She didn't have a pair of shoes, so she wasn't able to go to school. And for her, just a $5 pair of shoes meant I suddenly get to go to school. And so, you know, you put that into perspective when you come back here to a lot of the luxuries and privileges we have. So I'm sure you've seen plenty of that.
Yeah, so I definitely, it kind of reminds me, our first trip to Africa, it was more of a survey trip. And of course, I'm going there with the perspective of clean water, because that's kind of, I always say that's kind of the tip of the spear for us. We always are looking for communities that we can help with clean water. And I was blessed to take my teenage daughter with me. She was 16 at the time. I thought it would just be a great father-daughter experience. And of course, I'm looking at things from the perspective of how to get clean water. She's looking at things from the perspective of, you know, a teenage girl. And so the burden of fetching water at swamps and contaminated creeks generally falls on women and children. And so as we're talking to communities, we're talking to individuals and leaders in communities, and we're talking to a lot of the women that are forced to get water. She's talking to some teenage girls and was asking them, you know, what are some struggles they have, and found out that they're not able to go to school because they don't have proper feminine hygiene products. So she comes back, shares that story with some of her classmates at school, and they develop a completely new, it's really an organization in and of itself. It's kind of a subdivision of Run for Water on 84 days. 84 days is the number of days that a girl would miss from school if she doesn't have feminine hygiene. And that program has just been absolutely incredible. So we've been, now when we go to repair a well, we generally try to repair a well near where there's a school, so that some of the ladies on our team and some of the teenage girls can do this 84 days program where they provide the girls with a menstrual cup and reusable pads, and teach them about science of why this is happening to their bodies, and hygiene and sanitation. And when we were repairing one well, this was about a year ago, a gentleman came up and he said, what you're doing here is changing our community. It's changing lives. And that's a general statement that people give when you give water. I said, yes, I know water is life. He's like, I'm not talking about the water. He's like, I'm talking about the 84 days program. He said, because I'm a school teacher. And when one of these young girls, when they miss a week of school, they come back and they get behind naturally. He said, and the real problem is not that they're behind in their studies, is that they begin to think that they are intellectually inferior to the males simply because they're behind. And then then they miss a week next month, and the month after that. And then after 6 months or a year, they get discouraged and they end up dropping out of school. And I never really thought of it in that, from that perspective. And so that's been kind of a beautiful, it's probably the more relational side of our ministry. Obviously water, you know, connects us with a lot of individuals, but when our girls go do a 2 or 3 day, 84 days program at a school, there's relationships that are built, and you know, those smiles that those girls have, similar to what you witnessed, because they're able to stay in school, is definitely warms the heart.
Yeah, and it's a powerful testimony, I've said, over the last 5 or 6 years. And again, it's come through running, because I say that running has changed my prayer life. Running for me, or prayer used to be for me, and I think it's for a lot of Christians, it's this sort of, I want to present God with this wish list or this needs list. So God, be quiet for a little bit. Let me tell you all these things that I need, and then please deliver it as soon as possible. But what running did is it flipped that completely upside down for me. And I think it's part of this vulnerability. I mean, it doesn't take many miles for me to be in a midst of a struggle with my running where everything else in my mind is just drained, and I'm to this point of, and it's, people don't get it, but I tell people running is my be still and listening. And it seems like
Mhm.
that's backward, but it's not a physically still. That's where my mind gets the most still. And God has put some ideas on my heart and in my mind. But what I tell people is that they come with these little ideas, and then I try to pursue that. And then a mile down the road or a year down the road, he's done something completely different with that I could have never seen coming. And, I think, like running and life, I think it's just important for us to get out there and take that first step, or just pursue that little idea, and quit with ourselves trying to figure out where that's going to go or what outcome I'm trying to script, because about 10 times out of 10, God's going to script something out of that we couldn't see coming. And so I get goosebumps you talking about. I took my teenage daughter over there because I thought that would be a great experience for us. And I totally get that with my kids, but to hear God took that and said, well, Greg, I'm going to take your experience and I'm going to make something much bigger out of that. You got no idea. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
So just a couple more quick questions. I want to be sensitive of your time here. So we're in this time now where folks don't have races. They've all been canceled for the foreseeable future. And so I just wonder, you've talked about your why in running and how that's kind of changed your running. And certainly I don't have any enjoyment for running if there's not a strong why. I wonder if you think this period where folks don't have races and medals and podiums to kind of be looking towards, this is a chance for folks to rediscover the why and sort of the love for running.
I think so. I get the temptation. I've always been one to probably train a whole lot more than I race, because to me, the race is the test, you might say, and I think that's necessary. It's good to have a goal, but again, I also think that ultra running, if you allow it to do so, can train you and teach you to be more intrinsically motivated. And I find that really important. I think it's great to have a sense of community, and that's kind of the icing on the cake, you might say. But I hope that this time will enable people to maybe look and find that joy of running, and not just do a race because of the race swag, or because of the podium, or because of the win. And because ultimately that's the gift of running, is that day to day, like you mentioned, for me as well. It's my time to be still, even though my body's in motion. It's a time for my mind to kind of really meditate and to relax. And so hopefully this is a time for people to find that part of running.
Yeah, and spiritually speaking, like I said, it's never lost on me that, and especially after this weekend, Good Friday and Easter, and Jesus rose, but then ultimately went back to heaven. But when he left, he sent the Spirit to live inside us. And so, anytime I start to talk about extrinsically motivated or intrinsically motivated, I think God sent a very clear signal. I mean, he could have just kept us extrinsically looking up to him, but he said, no, I'm going to send something that,
Mm-hmm.
and then the way we understand it, I'm going to send you something to live inside you to allow you to do even more good than sort of these works I did. And I think, spiritually speaking, and in terms of spiritual practices, I think that prayer life, a lot of times we're spending a lot of time talking outward when we have the Spirit living right inside of us, wanting to guide us. So you said that last time we chatted, this whole idea of intrinsically motivated. And I think we're wired to be. I think we go all wrong when we get looking outward. And I think, again, the times we're in they at least speak to the danger of when we get wrapped up in a lot of things outside of ourselves. I got one last question. I've been wondering this since you got off your $100 Craigslist treadmill doing this backyard ultra, and it was your first one, and you were in the final four. Do you now have an interest in being a part of Laz's big dog backyard ultra live and in person? Is this something you've thought about now and have any itch at all to be a part of?
Most definitely. It is truly piqued my interest for sure. As far as this year, I have to say, Laz he's really messed up my whole race schedule for the year. If I can say that somewhat jokingly, I had originally planned one of my bucket list events because one of my first ultra was to run, through the state of Tennessee from Alabama to Kentucky. It's 120 miles. A lot of people don't realize that if you run the width of Tennessee from east to west or west to east from that long angle, it's 1,000 kilometers. It's over 600 miles to go from basically Memphis to Virginia. And so that was my original plan for spring break. I'm a school teacher, so I plan a lot of my big events around, breaks that we have. So my original plan starting back in November and December was to run 1,000 kilometers across the state of Tennessee. I was on the wait list for the Barkley marathons. And, generally if you're on the wait list, it's just a matter of time before you'll get in. You keep moving up the wait list. And I don't know if it was because of my performance at Ball State, but for some reason, Laz found me worthy to be in the actual event, without, move me up the wait list and put me in the event. So I found out early January that I'd made it into Barkley marathons. And, if you know anything about that race, it's over 1,000 applicants, only 40 people, are approved to get in. And so that's a great honor. And so you can't really pass that up. I'm afraid if you pass that up, that shit may not come back around again. So totally put off my 1,000 kilometer race and across Tennessee and started training for this crazy up and down race in the hills of Tennessee. And now that race was canceled, obviously. So and as soon as in January, when I decided I was going to postpone the 1,000 kilometer race, I put it off till my fall break in mid-October. So I say all that to say this. Yes, I'm very interested in bigs. I'm not sure if Laz would let me in now. Anyhow, I think the race is pretty much full, but I'd kind of committed to doing my 1,000 kilometer run across the state of Tennessee in mid-October. And I just don't think a week and a half is enough recovery time if you're running 620 miles to go into Big's backyard. So maybe 2021, we'll see.
Well, I look forward to it, buddy. I know I was on the phone with our mutual pal, Tracy Outlaw, and we were catching up, and I had the Zoom screen up, and I was watching you, and you were looking strong, and I was telling Tracy I'd been watching you and Harvey, and y'all looking good. And Tracy said, "Well, did you see Greg have to get off the treadmill to go put a goat down and bury it?" And I said, "You're making that up." He said, "No, he had to get off the treadmill, go euthanize a goat, and then come back and finish his lap." So we talked for about 45 minutes. And then I got off the phone with him, and I looked back at the screen, and you had gotten off the treadmill and got back on. So I was following some of the chat then on the sidebar, and it was telling the story how you had to get off the treadmill and get a snake, a 4.5-foot snake out of your basement. So I called Tracy back real quick. I said, "Are you following Greg? He just had to get off his treadmill and get a snake." And he was laughing, and we were laughing. I said, "Well, I wish there was a way just to put Greg up here. I just want to follow the rest of his race because it seems like it's going to be the most entertaining." But
yeah. there weren't any more wild animals after those two. It got a little warm in the house, so I asked my wife if we could open up the doors to get a little cross breeze through the room, and I guess that's where the snake came in. After I got the snake out, I had to close the doors, so I guess I could blame her that I got overheated and that caused more fatigue, but I won't do that.
I will share some of the pictures of the snake that you shared when I
Yeah.
published this. But I told Tracy, I often say, because I like to write and I'd like to keep blogs and things like that, and I said running for me is always just the stories. There's just also always so many good stories that come up in a race, but none of them I can't. I bow to you. I can't compete with burying goats and catching snakes in a race. So
Well, I have to admit, it was a pretty shallow grave, so I didn't, maybe it wasn't a really deep grave for Dolly the goat.
it doesn't matter. The story will live on and take on 1,000 iterations 20 years from now. So
Yeah.
hey, Greg, I really, really appreciate your time. I know you're busy, but like I said, when I talked with you last week and confirmed in this conversation, I just knew there was more about you that I wanted to learn and share and hopefully impact some lives out there. So I appreciate the time, buddy.
Yeah, sure, Keith. Yeah, and when you come down for Georgia Jewel, I think you have to pass through this area. I'd like to, Franklin and Jenny, they're dear friends. At one point, Franklin and I, we actually spent a week in Nicaragua together, putting together a running/water mission trip that it didn't pan out due to some political issues in Nicaragua. But maybe we can connect in person whenever you come down to do the Georgia Jewel.
I would love that, buddy. I would appreciate it. And like I said, I've been over there a couple times to Soles4Soles. Their headquarters is right there in Nashville. So
Yeah,
hopefully we will catch up. I'd really love that.
sure. Sounds great.
All right, buddy. Hey, have a good day, Greg. Thanks a lot
You do the
again.
same. Thanks,
See
Keith.
you, man. Yep. Well, thank you all for listening into that conversation with Greg Armstrong. I think it is a timely conversation, especially as Greg talked about the value in struggle. I think we are all struggling right now to some degree with this COVID-19 virus crisis going on all around us and all in our lives. But I loved how Greg was excited when he talked about the struggles he had with the Quarantine Backyard Ultra. The excitement came in the opportunity to learn more about himself, the opportunity to be stronger, to dig deeper, and really just better prepare himself to be a better person, a stronger person. And that's really what got me interested in wanting to talk with Greg and to just explore this parallel he draws between this ultra journey he's on and this life journey that he travels every day. So I encourage you, as part of that life journey, check out the work Greg is doing at Run4Water. It's the bigger reason behind a lot that he does. So go check that out. I will post a link wherever you will access this podcast. Also encourage you to go check out Running4Soles. Right now is a great opportunity for everybody who is stranded at home. Check in your closets. Find out if there are any old shoes laying around, any old clothes. Soles4Soles can repurpose those for opportunities for moms in developing countries around the world to start and grow small businesses that will help them support their young children, education, their families with shelter. So all of that can come about with shoes that are laying in the bottom of our closet that we will never ever wear or use again, and likely will end up in a dump somewhere. So take this time, gather them up. You can check out running4soles.com and find out all the avenues you have at your disposal to get those shoes donated to Soles4Soles. So I hope you all have a great day, and until next time, be well.